Hey guys, I hope you all enjoyed Nobody Plays Blackout. This is going to be the behind the scenes video for my short film, and if you haven't watched it, I'll link it in the description below or in a pinned comment. So in this video, we're going to go through pre-production, production, and post-production for Nobody Plays Blackout, my 2024 short film. We are going to start off with writing. So like my previous short films, I've opted to write it in LaTeX, which is free and gives you beautiful screenplays if you use the screenplay document class up here. And I figured I'd walk through our creative decisions that we made in the process of writing this short film. Before I wrote Nobody Plays Blackout, one thing that I was doing was with one of my colorist friends, we would go through different color grading tutorials and we would create these bingo boards. And I can show you what these look like here. I had like this big word bank of, I don't know, maybe 75 different words. And we would generate, a bunch of bingo boards. And they have all these kind of like different tropes that you find in these color grading tutorials, and it'd be kind of fun to like look for them. Truthfully, we very rarely actually got a bingo, but sometimes we got pretty close. And we're playing this form of bingo like maybe once a week and having a great time with it. And I figured like that was in line with some of my previous short films in which I was taking some kind of basic children's game like rock, paper, scissors, or beer pong. I suppose that's not really a children's game. And then we would try to like ramp it up to 11. Ultimately, this led to an idea for a short film that I think was good enough to turn into something that I would want to shoot. So at the beginning of 2024, we started brainstorming for a screenplay for one of my short films. The idea that I had in mind was a guy who gets addicted to bingo to such an extent that it ultimately ruins his relationship. And I had at the very beginning, I had thought of the ending of the short film, which is that he ultimately gets a bingo doing something that would normally be quite sad, which is, in this case, it would be a breakup. So ultimately, he is finding a success at a deep point of failure. So the way that I look at it whenever making a short film is that I feel like two things have to be going on at once. So one is going to be that this guy has this bingo addiction, and the other is going to be his relationship with his girlfriend. So the relationship with his girlfriend deteriorates, and then we know that the bingo thing has to ultimately succeed. So we have this kind of crisscross of different trajectories there. And then ultimately I wanted to also have a conflict of ideas. So the main character, Danny, he starts off in a relationship and the relationship falls apart. So it seemed to me that it would make sense for his friend to kind of have the opposite trajectory. So the more invested someone is with bingo in my short film, the more of a loner and incompatible with a relationship they ultimately become. Another challenge was that I had to make it so that his addiction to bingo was something that would maybe be believable, right? So one challenge is always going to be, the audience is going to be wondering, why doesn't this guy just stop playing bingo, right? So you have to give him such a strong motivation that it makes sense why he won't give up. So we brainstormed a few different ideas, and ultimately we landed on this idea of Danny plays bingo because it is his dead friend's dying wish. That way he doesn't really have the option to back out at the end of the day. So yeah, in the period of a short film, there isn't too much time to explain everything. So we wanted to very early on establish that Danny has a good relationship. So he's thinking about proposing to her at the very beginning. He's got an engagement ring for her already. So in the very first scene that has both Danny and Amanda, generally she's very caring. We want to establish that it's something of a healthy relationship before it all goes downhill. A fun fact with the character names here is that I was writing this with my friend Amanda, and she wanted the female character to have her name too, Amanda. And skipping ahead a little bit, when I flew down to South Africa to shoot this short film, I stuck around for the 48-hour film contest, and we shot a 48-hour there. And the required character that we had to have in the 48 was Danny. So I figured, you know what? We just shot this thing, Nobody Plays Blackout. And if we have to have one character named Danny in the 48, then we might as well name the other character Amanda too. So that's how we ended up recycling the same names between these two short films.
Amanda!
Danny!
If you haven't seen that short film, Neural Nexus, I'll link it in the description as well. So overall, the writing process, I think you should always start with a very strong outline. So for each scene, we wrote a list of goals that indicate what we wanted to accomplish with each scene. So for example, for scene 1, we had to show that Will enjoys bingo a lot. We have to show that bingo is something where if you get it, that's the greatest thing that ever happened. And we have to show how much Will cares about it. And then finally, Danny has to take on the bingo boards, and therefore he inherits the duties that are associated with getting a bingo. From there, we outlined each scene and we indicate like, oh, here's a way that that's going to play out, and then we just had to write the dialogue after that point. I think maybe like the biggest weaknesses that a lot of short films have is that they don't establish a strong outline in which all the story arcs are clear and well motivated and properly established in the first place. So I find that outlining like every scene and outlining the overall short is incredibly useful and very valuable to making your own shorts. One other thing to highlight here is that we did sometimes have a few different variations of a scene. What we ended up going with for this scene is Amanda finds the condoms in Danny's bag, and basically they get into an argument over it. We had a different variation of the scene in which Danny and Amanda go on a date, but like Danny's super late and he's preoccupied with bingo, that sort of thing, so that we can show more of the relationship deteriorating. Ultimately, like getting more restaurant locations is relatively expensive. So we opted to do this like interior, like at home kind of. So we opted to do the interior, like at home kind of scene instead. And also, I did not want to make it feel too redundant where they're like arguing maybe too much over the course of the short film. After writing the script, we had to come up with all these different bingo boards that were going to be in the notebook of bingo boards that I have here. So ultimately, the way that we went about this was we searched for like different listicles and like different things online to find activities to fill up the boards here. And we needed a pretty solid blend of like very difficult tasks to complete, as well as some easy ones, so that the boards could be like partially filled out and we could say something about Will's character, who has never done any of the dating or romance ones, but he has done like a handful of the crime and like random thing boards. We then took these entries and we pasted them back into the website that I just showed you here. So I pasted them into the word list, and then I screenshotted these guys, and I created little boards out of it that I printed out onto a small paper and like hole punched them and put them in here. In order to actually arrange the boards in a way that worked for the short film, I like went over to that webpage with the bingo board generator, and I did like inspect element, and then I like moved everything around manually so that every like 3 or 4 in a row that Will had been pursuing would have basically some impossible to obtain empty spot in it that would definitely discourage Danny from trying to pursue the same board. So for the purpose of production for the short, I printed out, I think, 6 to 8 copies of each board, so we could do many different takes of like checking off squares and things like that. So now that writing was complete, it was time to get into production. I flew down to Cape Town in August 2024 to stay with my good friend Misha, and he was going to help produce this short film with me in a 2-week period. So we're going to spend the first week scouting talent and locations, and we're going to spend the second week shooting. The first thing we did was we connected with one of Misha's friends, was this guy named Chris. Chris runs an agency for extras, so we knew a lot of actors that we could potentially use who would enjoy practicing on a smaller budget short film like mine. Misha and I, we then toured all the different like restaurants and whatnot that were nearby. We asked like bartenders and restaurant owners, and also like that little small supermarket store thing. We asked all these people if we could shoot at their places, and they offered very like reasonable rates for us to pay them to shoot there for an afternoon. And in the meantime, Chris found us a few actors who could star in our short film. On Saturday, at the end of the first week, we showed up at this very nice house to begin production. In terms of shooting, I ended up using the Laowa Nanomorph 1.5x anamorphic zooms. So these are Super 35 zoom lenses with a T2.9 aperture. They've got it in like the 28 to 55 and a 50 to 100 millimeter. Ultimately, I ended up shooting most of the short on the 50 to 100 just because I like the look of these longer focal lengths. And one of the downsides to this lens, as well as the other one, is that they protrude some distance beyond the PL mount. So as a result, on my Zcam E2, which is like a micro four thirds sensor, I couldn't use my focal reducer with it because there's just not enough distance between the lens mount and the first glass element in the focal reducer. This would result in the image having a narrower field of view and less depth of field and worse low light performance. So between all of those factors, I ended up upgrading my camera to the Zcam E2 F6. The E2 F6 is a full frame camera. It's not like the best performance, in the sense that like the rolling shutter is like pretty bad at the full frame mode. However, because these are Super 35 lenses, um, ultimately I use the Super 35 crop modes, which have pretty fast rolling shutter, and this would give me closer to the image that I was interested in for this project. So ultimately, I shot the entire project in this anamorphic 4:3 Super 35 mode, kind of giving me the best of both worlds. I've actually like never really used this camera in the full frame mode. One thing I'll say is that I did go for these zoom lenses because I find that with zooms you can kind of fit more focal lengths into one bag that you're traveling with. And the other aspect is that you don't have to spend really any time waiting for lens swaps because you can kind of just zoom in and out as needed. So anyway, back to production. It was the end of August 2024. So in South Africa, that means that they're on the tail end of winter. So we show up to this house, and it's just starting to rain here. We pulled in one of Misha's other friends, Will, to help with lighting. He normally does like videography and that sort of thing. So he brought in a couple lights. He had some of these Godox COB lights, and we also had some tube lights that you can see in this still here. We started off with all the scenes that took place at Danny and Amanda's house. So we started off with this morning scene because it was still daytime. Unfortunately, it wasn't daytime for long, but we kind of recycled my strategy that I used in First Message, in which we just take lights that are kind of warm colored and we stick them outside the windows and point them inside. This gives a fairly plausible morning daytime color. And you can see here we put a slight yellow gel on the light. In an ideal world, I think we would have gone with a gel that was less strongly yellow and just covered the whole light with it, because when you put it fractionally on there, sometimes you end up with these shadows where part of the shadow is more yellow and some parts are more white. Something that nobody has really noticed in the short film is that during the close-ups of Dylan here, who plays Danny, sometimes you can see that outside the window it's totally nighttime. It's very dark. I was thinking about swapping those out in post, but that seemed like it'd be too much work, so I just didn't get around to it. So yeah, in this image you can see what our setup was for the morning shot in the third scene. We've got one light here that's sitting outside that is primarily doing the rim light on Danny. Well, actually this guy here is me, but Danny's over here and Amanda's over here. Amanda's played by Justina. She did an excellent job. And then we just lit the background and filled it up a little bit as if there was light out there. I think due to the layout of the backyard, we couldn't actually stick this light outside the window to make that plausible. So we just have that sitting in this living room here and hope that we can frame it without anyone noticing. We then moved on to the scene in which Danny and Amanda are arguing about the condoms in the bag. For this one, we just recycled the light that was out here. I think we moved it to the left a little bit and blue gelled it. In retrospect, given how warm the interior was, I don't think it was necessary to put a blue gel on that light. We probably should have kept it more like daylight colored. So our lighting setup here was that we had the blue light outside hitting the background, and then we used a tube light in here to kind of act as a key that was in a maybe more appealing location than if we had stuck with the practical lights that were already in the room. Finally, we stuck another light outside the front of the house, which would kind of illuminate this back room over here with a similar blue gel. It's not visible in all the shots, but it's visible in a couple of them. Is that entirely plausible that your house would have a light sandwich coming from both sides of moonlight? Probably not, but I don't think anyone's going to care. Finally, we shot the most nighttime of all the scenes, which was that second scene in which Danny comes home and informs Amanda that his friend Will has been shot over a mugging. So we had this bedroom that was in the same house, and we stuck a light outside with a blue gel on it, going through the windows, and I was careful to place the light so that we wouldn't have like an awkward shadow going right across Justina's head as she's in the bed. And we also had another blue light inside that was filling up that hallway so that we could get that nice silhouette of Dylan as he's like going through the drawers and whatnot. The idea here was to get something of a color contrast between this blue light that's illuminating kind of the room coming from the night, as well as the warm light that is on the bedside table. The next day we went to the supermarket to shoot the fourth scene of the short. We kind of just ended up shooting outside in the front, so this had like no real lighting setups in it, and I was just holding the camera on my shoulder as I did for really the whole short film. We also paid the owners of the supermarket so that we could shoot inside there for a few hours. They were very nice to let us do that, and in there our lighting setup was just that we had a tube light on a stand some distance behind Dylan in order to kind of give him a bit of a backlight. And then we had Misha play the security guy. He insisted that he have 0 lines in the short film, so naturally we gave him the security guy. And in advance, we went to like a uniform store and bought this baseball hat that said security on it. That hat cost like $3. One thing we ran into was that we didn't have quite enough extras to fill in all the places in the short film. So we ended up casting Will to play the store owner, and I think he did an excellent job at that one. A few days later, we went to Cargo, which was this other nice like bar/restaurant down in Cape Town. And we arranged with them that we could shoot on one of these days in the few hours before they opened. We had Nico here who plays Will. We had him also play the waiter, and I carefully cropped it so that his head wouldn't end up in the shots. And yeah, we just kind of stuck Justina in like one of these chairs upstairs, and we had the kitchen make us a few appetizers that we ordered. During one of the previews for the short film, someone told me that it was obvious that they were just drinking water out of the wine glasses. I will inform you that it was indeed actually wine, and I finished the wine at the end. And we shot it all with available lighting. There is one trick though, which is that even though it was available light, I still have choice over where I sit the talent, right? So I opted to sit her in this spot so that the lighting would generally come in through this window and give good shape to the face and allow there to be like a shadow on her left side. So even if you're only shooting with natural light, you can do what you can to make it look as good as possible. On our final day of shooting, we started off by going to the Perseverance Tavern to shoot the first scene, as well as the scene in which Danny attempts to buy crystal meth. So we started off with their dialogue scene. You can see we've got a tube light sitting up here that's illuminating them. Maybe I should have turned it down a little bit, so it's a little bright. And then we also had a light down the hallway over here, or maybe it was outside, I'm not sure, that had a blue gel on it. So you can see I just shot right off the shoulder here. We did bring in an extra at the last second to play the girl who is over here who ordered the drink. And we got Will, our lighting guy, again to be the bartender during this sequence. For the segment in which Danny tries to buy the drugs, we lit this by hiding 2 horizontal tube lights just above the talent. I chose my camera angle so that to be generally behind the 2 characters looking over each other's backs so that we could shoot from the shadow side. And once again, we had Will play the drug dealer. So that's yet another role that he had in this short film. Here you can see the setup with our one extra in which we had a tube light sitting up here that would help bring her out and increase the contrast ratios a little bit. Finally, that evening, we went ahead and shot the robbery segment. So the majority of this was dialogue as Nico and Dylan are walking down the street towards the camera. And once again, we had Will play the robber. This guy had like 4 roles in this short film, so you'll see him several times in the credits. And despite this being South Africa, we did indeed use an airsoft gun for extra safety here, so we're not going to be pulling any Alec Baldwins. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, we did find time to shoot the final scene of the short film where the 2 of them are arguing with each other in the car. That one we just shot under the available lighting. And it was the usual strategy of roll down one of the windows and shoot through that window, and then like go to the other side, swap the windows, and shoot back. So it was very few setups for that one. The only challenging part was getting the close-ups of the bingo boards. So for that one, we would like cheat the positions of the seats and then shoot over the shoulder, however we could make it fit. So a little bit of cheating here and there, but that's only made the shorts better. So that's enough of production, so we'll go into post-production next. After production had wrapped, we got into editing. It did take us a while to get started with the edit, but frankly, editing is my least favorite part of making videos in general. So this was nothing new to me. So what I decided to do for this short film is I decided to just outsource the editing to someone else. So what I did was our lighting guy, Will, he mostly works with this editor named Bradley. So I just recruited him to do the rough cut, which in my view is like the most boring part of the edit, but it's also very influential in terms of the final result. So what I ended up doing was I gave him the screenplay and I told him like, hey, just cut it kind of like according to this. And he stuck to it pretty well, which is more or less what I would have done. He made some good creative choices, like starting off with this shot here in order to kind of establish our location in the bar. But eventually he gave me the edit back, and I went ahead and made a couple small modifications that even deviated from the script, which I wasn't really planning on, but we had to do it in order to make the movie hit as well as possible. So in my case, there were two edits that we made relative to the screenplay. So in scene 7, we kind of do like an intercut between Amanda at the restaurant and Danny trying to buy crystal meth. We can see the scope that we had for each. So initially we have Amanda. She goes to the restaurant. She says, "Thank you. Might I offer you a beverage while you wait?" says the waiter. Amanda requests appetizers for 2. So we stuck with that pretty well. Then we have Danny entering the bar. Danny approaches the dealer. We stuck with that pretty well. We've got Amanda sits alone and she's halfway through the food. We stuck with that. Now for the rest of the scene, we have a kind of different approach. So in this case, what I had written is Danny says, "Do you know who might be selling the crystal methamphetamine?" Dealer says, "Who's asking?" Danny says, "That's me." Dealer says, "You got cash." In the original screenplay, you see that he pulls out the $20 bill, he hands it to the dealer, then he gets arrested. And then we cut back to Amanda, who is seeing that Danny is at the sketchy bar, and she is disgusted, right? So what we ended up doing is we took this section here, and we ended up sticking that just before the "I've got a 20." So dealer says, "You've got cash," and then we go over here. You can see it says, "You've got cash," and then she checks her phone. She's disgusted, and then we go back to Danny getting arrested. So he says, "I've got a 20. You've got a deal." Then he gets arrested, just like that, and then we end up in prison. So I think this flow works a lot better because like it gives us a scene transition. Initially, we tried swapping this around so that this section ends up after "You've got yourself a deal." So we had a few different variations of it, but ultimately I think this one kind of flowed the best. And, that's a kind of decision that I think editors should be making. The other way that we deviated from the screenplay was the very ending. So originally, we've got Amanda and she's doing the breakup. She says, "I can't do this. I can't believe you're just going to sit there and check off boxes. It's like you don't even care." She says, "Are you even listening to me?" He finally gets he gets a 4 in a row. Last square says, "Partner states it's me or the bingo." She says that. He crosses off the 5th square. Then he looks to her. She says, "We're over." And then he says, "Bingo," in response. This is competent on its own, I think. But what we ended up doing in the short film is I wanted to do a good callback to everything else that's happened in the short. So what we did is we got rid of her last line here, "We're over." And then we do a little flashback to all the important scenes and the little traumatic events that have happened. It felt much cleaner, and I think having the callback to the previous parts of the short to bookend it a little bit, I think that is always a winning move in terms of having like a good emotional hook. So those are the two major parts that I would discuss in the editing process. Let's move on to VFX. Next up, let's cover VFX for my short film. So there are a small handful of VFX shots in this short, and I think we'll start with the most obvious one. So the most obvious one here is going to be the gunshot that is right at the beginning. So you can see here what the main composite looks like, and I'll show you what the backplate looks like. So one of the challenges with the backplate on this specific shot is that there's a delay between the gunshot and then Nico falling to the ground. So that was something that we're going to have to fix. Also, this recoil of the gun, I think, is, that's like, 6 frames long or so, and that's honestly just too slow. So these were all things that I wanted to be able to fix in the final composite. So you can see there's a substantially larger movement, and we've tightened it up quite a lot, like that. So let's open up the original clip here and check out how the composite was done. So you can see it might be a little bit of a mess here. All right, so you can see that we've got a few different assets here. We've got like a blood splat. Let's make sure we got it in color mode. So we've got the blood splatter. We've got like this kind of like smoke thing going on. Let's see how that looks. These 2 bits we're gonna have coming out of Nico's back. Next up, we've got our back plate. The back plate, we've got this little bit of a cheat here. So basically, we've just built the jump cut right into it, so that it can be a bit better timed. I've used my periodic frame sampler in order to do this. So you can see we go from like being, input starting at frame 92, output frame 92, and then like the next moment we've skipped like 5 frames, so now we're outputting frame 98 for frame 93. Okay, so you can see the next node we have is a transform. So this is because when we remove the 5 or 6 frames, they're no longer going to be quite that well aligned. So this fixes the alignment problem before and after we do that little jump cut. Next up, we're going to go to linear, and we've got a tracker. So we do a little bit of a 2D track so that we can blend in our blood splatter and kind of track that in properly relative to the camera movement. Over here, we have an asset for the muzzle flare. I'm recycling the same strategy from previous years in which I have this Blender project in which I can 3D render a muzzle flare from any angle. There are some improvements that could be made to it. I think one thing that might be nice in the future would be to have some kind of like little sparks and stuff that come out of it. And it would also be nice if it came with some smoke, but we're actually just going to do our smoke with fast noise down here, which is a little bit of a cheat. It doesn't look very good, but when it's very transparent, it's not the most obvious. So we exposure up the muzzle flare, and we're going to ultimately add that onto the linear state image. So we just plus that on, which is, I believe, accurate to how fire works. If you light a candle, you'll notice the flame doesn't cast a shadow. That's because it's just added on. So yeah, so we've got our image that's been stabilized. It's been linearized. And a little bit of noise reduction here to help us out. And here we have like a color adjustment. So basically we've masked out all these like little polygons, like areas that should be illuminated by this hot muzzle flare. And you should be able to see, I think if we bring this guy up here, you should be able to see all these areas. So here it's lighting him up. It's lighting up a bit here. It's got this surface on the arm, and we're just going to be gaining those up. So I've just got like a little color boost in which we gain up red by this much and green by that much within that region that I've masked out with the polygons. Next up, you see we've got we've added on the muzzle flare, and then we're going to do like a little bit of a bloom adjustment on it so that it integrates a little better into the frame. And we stick all that stuff together. Then we're good to go. Yeah, so that's pretty much the composite here on the muzzle flare shots. The next VFX shot is going to be the title card. So in this one, we put "Nobody Plays Blackout" on the wall behind Dylan as he walks down. You can see before it looked like this, and then after we have him walking through, and that's going to look like that. So let's pull up the original, let's pull up the composite. And this one's relatively simple. So here we've got our media in, and I'm going to go ahead and linearize it. And at the same time over here, I'm going to basically magic mask out Dylan. So for the purpose of magic mask, I used the faster mode rather than the better one. Is able to get pretty decent results, and then I had to mess with the matte settings in order to get the edges to be decent enough. One challenge was that like as he like walks along, there are some frames where there are definitely like some small gaps here, right? Where the magic mask wasn't doing a great job, like especially like this kind of frame. What this is going to result in is that when I put the text behind him, there will be some holes in the text that don't quite work out. So the solution for that is that I just put the text in a slightly different spot so that whenever there was like some kind of problem with the masking, that it just wasn't visible. Otherwise, I would probably just go through with the mask paint node, and then I would have to just clean up the areas where the magic mask did a bad job. All right, so anyway, so we take our image over here. We're going to linearize it, and we've got our text over here that's laid out in kind of the way that I want. And I've gone ahead and tracked the image using a variety of markers and IntelliTrack. And in the tracker, I'm going to set it to match move foreground only. So what that's going to do is when I connect the text to both inputs of the tracker, it is going to move the text in the same way as the underlying image. When I tracked it, I did have the media in connect to the background of the tracker. So as a result, you can see on the left here, the text kind of like wobbles around in the appropriate way. Next up, we're going to merge the match moved text onto the background image. You know, I've also got a motion blur going on the tracker. We're going to merge that on top, and then we're going to be sure to use the magic mask and exclude the region in which Dylan is present. So we're going to be using this as the foreground whenever possible, unless Dylan is in the way. That's going to be the general idea. Next up, I add a little bit of noise to the text in the background so that it kind of matches the noise pattern and coarseness of the foreground. It's not perfect, but it just has to be good enough, I suppose. Then we go back to our zlog2 state, and here I've got like a preview of the Rec 709 just after the media out. So this way I can monitor the image as needed while I'm compositing. So it's pretty simple. Ultimately, it all boils down to using this tracker. There is a bit of a challenge sometimes where text in Fusion is not like super anti-aliased. So my fix for that here is I generate the text in 8K. You can see here it's 8,000 pixels wide, whereas my image is 4,000. And then I just downscale it by a factor of 2. And that generally fixes any anti-aliasing problems with the text. Here's a VFX shot that was a little bit of a small fix. So in the original clip, it kind of looks like this. So Dylan sits down here, and then he's going to look over to the drug dealer. But unfortunately, we had Will over here, and he already started turning. He already starts turning, and you can see the reflection in the top right here. So I figured I have to make it so that he doesn't turn in this reflection, so that in the next shot when Will turns and faces Dylan, it's not like preempted. So here's how it looked after the fact. So here he sits down, and you can see he turns, and there's no movement in the reflection. So here's how we're going to do it. So I took my input clip, and then I did a little bit of noise reduction because it was a little too noisy, and we don't want to like have the noise be frozen in this area. And what I've gone ahead and done is I've isolated the noise by doing a subtraction operation. So we've taken the input image, the noise reduced image, and we take the input minus the noise reduction. So this gives us just the noise. Maybe it'll be more visible if I have it on like a waveform here. So you can see that this is basically just what the noise is going to look like. And the idea is that at the end of the composite, we can add the noise back on at the very end, and therefore maintain believable noise levels. After doing the noise reduction, we're going to do a little freeze frame on the frame in which I want Will's face to be stationary. And you can see by sending the this guy to the left viewer, there's nothing moving because we've frozen the frame. I've then drawn an ellipse here around this shape that is going to be on the side of this tap that we've got. And we go ahead and multiply that in, so now we just have this asset here, right? And then all we have to do next is we have to track the input image. We've put some markers in these spots. I'm generally doing my best when shooting from the shoulder to kind of just stay stationary, so most of the movement is just going to be translational. So I've gone ahead and tracked it here. And we can see the operation. We've got position, rotation, scaling, and we're just going to match move this oval on top of the background. And if we do a good enough job, then no one's going to notice that maybe the track isn't entirely perfect. Finally, we add back in the noise, and that's going to be our resulting image. And here's the last notable VFX shot that I think some of the colorists in the audience are going to enjoy. So in this shot in which Dylan walks out of the Cape Town Central Police Station, we did actually just go to the police station and shoot it. It was kind of funny. Like he would just like walk in, and we'd like tell him to go in and then wait 10 seconds and then come out, and I would try to record it. I think we did like 2 takes. In the take that I ultimately did, I noticed that I had accidentally bumped the iris ring on the lens. So it was accidentally underexposed. And if you've ever shot on Zcam, you'll know that it's terrible to underexpose this camera. That was kind of a problem in some of the nighttime shots at the beginning of the movie, where I accidentally knocked it down to f4, and it was and that's why some of the shots are really noisy. But yeah, so I noticed that that it was underexposed, so I tried to fix it, and unfortunately, that's the same moment that Dylan comes out. So you can see that the shot begins with an exposure change, right? And that's something that would be a little annoying to try to fix using keyframing in post. Here's a fixed result. You can see that there's really no exposure movement at all compared to the original, right? So how did we do it? So conceptually, what we're going to do is this. We're going to go to linear, and we're going to look at a patch like around here somewhere. From there, we're going to do a gain adjustment in which we ensure that this patch here is always going to be the same brightness. I just picked this spot up here because nothing like drives or goes in front of it, and it stays in the frame for the entire duration of the shot. So that's really what makes it ideal. If you had a lens that had like a heavy vignette or something like that, you really wouldn't want to pick something that like goes into the edges or out of the edges, or you would want to correct the vignette on the lens first and then do this kind of thing. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and track it. And unfortunately, I was very shaky for this shot. So you can see that there's quite a bit of movement. And I've made sure to put some tracking points around the corners of this area that I intend to do my exposure compensation on. So the next thing we're going to do is here we go to linear. And from there, we're going to do a little blur. The reason we're going to do a blur is that we don't want our little sample to be sampling some like noisy area in the image, because then if there's noise, that's going to be affecting our exposure change that we're making. So we're going to like blur it, and then we're going to sample from the middle of this region. I've got this DCTL called color sampler, and you can see here that we've got a crosshair that goes right to the middle of this spot right here. And then I go ahead and select sampled color, and now the entire frame is just the color that was sampled. We're going to do that once here, and then we're also going to do it again on a frozen version of the shot in which nothing's moving, and this is going to be the shot that has the target exposure, right? So here we've got, this is like the target brightness of that patch, and then on the left we've got like the measured brightness throughout the shot. So what are we going to do? We're just going to divide between these two things. So this tells us how much gain we're going to need to do. So initially we need to do 2.14 times gain in order to bring the exposure of the first frame up to the same exposure as the rest of the shot. So I go ahead and multiply that in, right? So here's the media in log state. We go to linear, we multiply by this ratio, and then we're going to go back to log. And that's it. That's an easy composite right there. And you can see the result is that the exposure is very much fixed. All right, that concludes VFX. Let's hop into a quick discussion on sound. Let's discuss sound. So sound is going to have two parts. One is going to be the part that I did, and then the other part is going to be the music, which I contracted out. On the sound side, I guess there were a few things worth discussing. So one is the production audio that we had on location when we were shooting. We shot most of it using two different microphones. So one of them was the MKH 416 Classic, and then the other one was the MKH 50, which is more of an indoor microphone, but it's less directional. Big picture, the choice of which of the two microphones to use comes down usually to like, oh, if you're indoors, you use the MKH 50, because these shotgun microphones tend to sometimes pick up odd interference, and they sound worse when you're near hard surfaces. But generally, I think that the lack of directionality to the MKH 50 kind of made it like a worse choice indoors, especially if you have like a somewhat uncontrolled environment. As an example, with this restaurant scene, we were shooting with the MKH 50, and there's also some air conditioning running, and that air conditioning got picked up, and honestly, like the sound quality like was not great as a result. And I think we might have been better off if I had used a more directional microphone. What we did find though was that fortunately, because I had waited like a year to finish the short film, Blackmagic Design has really improved their AI like noise reduction tools. And I was able to fix most of the noise of this air conditioning using Resolve's AI noise reduce feature. So we ended up using the AI voice isolation tool set to maybe like 20 for most of the clips in this scene, as well as a handful of clips in many of the other scenes. This AI voice isolation tool is honestly kind of broken in Resolve. So when you use it like and then restart the project, it will sometimes like forget the settings and like turn it all off, which is very frustrating. So as a result, I took all of the audio that had the effects on and I bounced out like new tracks that had the voice isolation stuff baked in. And that's why you see that here. In short, our strategy was I took all the audio that we had recorded on location and I sliced it up so that we had every person's lines were on their own tracks. So we have a few tracks for Dylan, we have a few tracks for Justina, Nico, and Will. Then I could assign each their own noise reduction and EQ and dynamics and so on. And that's something that's like really convenient when we're doing the audio. So the majority of the audio processing is just like very simple stuff. There's noise reduction, there's leveling. So I leveled all of the audio clips so that they would peak at around like -10-ish, somewhere between -15 and -10. And then I applied the necessary noise isolation and stuff like that. So that mostly covers the audio. At the very end, after I received the music back from our composer, I went through the whole short by hand, and then I automated the volume fader on all the different lines so that they kind of came out to about the same volume, and this really improved the consistency of the audio and made it a lot easier to understand. Down here at the bottom, I'm going to highlight some of the other stuff that we added on. So we've got a bunch of room tones. So about half of the room tones I sourced from different like sound libraries that I had downloaded from the internet. My strategy with sound libraries is that I'm like subscribed to the newsletters of like a couple different sound websites that like give out free sounds every month. So I've like slowly accumulated a collection. So we've got a bunch of different like room tones that I've got that are like, you know, residential or like kind of vehicles and stuff like that. And I also went to my living room and to my car and I recorded some room tones there in order to be kind of representative of how these places would sound. I also used this as an opportunity to be a little bit creative. So for this scene here where Dylan is like thinking about stealing the condoms, I thought it'd be funny to like bring in like some room tone that came from like I guess like kids playing, so you can hear like a little bit of like the children in the background when he's like thinking about stealing condoms. I'll play that clip right now so that you can see how that sounded. For this segment where he's looking at the boards and he's thinking about committing a crime, I've pulled in a sound effect of like cops sirens in the background. So like that's something that he's thinking about in that moment. So that's like another small like adjustment that I made.
Most would be impossible to complete. I'm so close.
So next up we had a bunch of Foley. What I did for these is I went through by hand and I recorded Sharpie noises. I recorded like the sound of like a glass hitting the table here. I recorded a bunch of my keys and stuff going into this bag. Like I just did these in my room, which was a much quieter environment than what we had shot on location. And for the gunshot, we've got a combination of several things. We've got like a real gunshot noise that we recorded at the range from a 9mm. And we've got a box latch. We've got like, you know, kind of like a juicy like squish noise. We've got like a boom sound. We've got like one of these rifle shots that had like a nice reverb to it. And I also added on like this 9mm like shell casing sound that lands like after the trigger is pulled. So that kind of all just sounds really nice. And then here's like a sound effect where I like grabbed this with the microphone and then I flipped through it like in accordance to how the video looked. And we also got like the thump sound of like the book hitting the chest. There was some of that in the on location sound, but like it was better to just record it like in a quieter room. So that way you could hear all the pages. We're shooting this like next to a busy street. It wasn't like on a busy street, but like, you know, 100 yards away was like a busy street. So it's quite noisy when we're shooting this whole scene. One thing that you'll often see that I do with like flashbacks is I found this like whoosh noise in one of my sound effects packs. And I found that like if I play it forwards or backwards, it makes a good whoosh like transition that goes into these flashbacks. And then I like to layer it on top of like some subway sound that I've done some EQ work on. So usually I'll take the subway and I'll do like a low pass filter. And, you know, we whoosh into the low pass subway thing and we can like volume adjust the subway over time and that sort of thing. Sometimes for these whooshes, I'll like do an EQ on it too. That'll be like a low pass filter, but looks like I didn't do that here. Yeah, like I went to my car and I recorded like these visor noises like in the car, like the thump, putting the visor up. It's kind of fun to do the Foley bits, I'll say. Yeah, I did the handshake one myself as just one of these. And the body floor thud sound. What I did for that one is I put a bunch of my sandbags into like a duffel bag and then I like dropped it on the floor. I recorded maybe 4 or 5 of those, so, you know, apologies to the downstairs neighbor. Yeah, and then we just do a rehash of like the gunshot scene like at the end. I added like a different boom to it. And here we did a little bit more work. I've like gained up the subway sound so that it like gets louder and louder over time so that it's almost like overwhelming by the end of the flashback. And yeah, and then we've taken this sound here where it was like a body earlier, but now I've doubled on this like deep boom noise. So it sounded a bit more intense. And yeah, and then we just get into the end, and that's basically the end of like all my Foley that I added in post. Yeah, and then finally we've got like the music track. So for this short, You know, I'm already like a year behind on it. I meant to get it out sometime like maybe early this year, but you know, I was busy with other side projects and whatnot. So I opted to reach out to this guy named Wesley. Wesley worked with us on some 48-hour short films this year in 2025. And I thought he did a great job on the music. So I reached out to him and I was like, hey, can you do the music for my short? Because, you know, I was thinking about doing the music myself, but uh, honestly, just getting started with it, like with my new computer where I don't have all the instruments downloaded and all that, I was like, it's like, I'd rather not, you know? So I reached out to him to do the music and he did a great job. Like, you know, we like watched through the short together and I gave like my ideas as to what I thought could work for maybe each scene. And then he was like, oh, let me get you a first draft in a week. And then a week later, he sends it to me and it's like 95% of the way there. And I thought it was really good. We just did a couple more iterations of it. And then we're at the result that we have here. I just went through and did like some volume automation on it just so that it's like, just so that it doesn't compete with the dialogue at all. And yeah, it was really good to go. One idea that he threw out there that I hadn't considered was like every time the boards show up on the screen, he tries to bring in like a bingo board like theme, which is kind of like the main melody that you hear in the music. And at times it's more subtle, sometimes it's a little bit more of that twinkle noise. And then he's also given many of the scenes with Justina like their own kind of music, so he'll like lean into the piano a bit more for those. And otherwise, like when it's Dylan alone, it's like it's more this kind of like heist sort of music, so you can kind of hear the different instrumentation. And I really thought it was super consistent, and I was a big fan. So huge shout out to Wesley. I'll put a link to his stuff in the description below. Finally, let's get into the color and the delivery stage. Let's go ahead and hop into the color grade. So for my color grade, I've added all of my clips into different groups. Each group corresponds to a specific scene. So you can see I have a look for every single scene. Frankly, almost all the looks are identical, but this is useful in case I want to deliberately change just one specific scene. So let's go ahead and walk through the node graph here. First, in the group pre-clip, we have nothing. I'm actually going to reserve my IDT for the clip stage because I'm going to put different stuff before the IDT. So one example is I have a dead pixel removal. So unfortunately, the Zcam that I have, it has a couple dead pixels. One of them's down here, and I think there's one that's somewhere up here somewhere, but I can't always find it, to be honest. That's something that we're just going to remove right off the bat. Next up, we have noise reduction. So noise reduction is something that we used particularly during the noisier scenes at the beginning of the short. In scene 2, where as I had described, I had underexposed some of the shots. Yeah, so some of these shots you can see that I have some noise reduction going on. Generally, I just tried to get away with using the spatial noise reduction so that we wouldn't have any temporal noise reduction artifacts. After making the noise reduction, I went ahead and node cached it so that we wouldn't have to sit through the processing every time. After that, we go to linear. So I have a DCTL in which I've linearized the zlog2 curve. Here we have a node that's going to represent any miscellaneous like operations that I neglected to compensate for when designing the node graph. So this would ultimately become a compound node that has many different per shot specific things inside of it. The next node is going to be the highlight reconstruction node. So historically, in order to execute highlight reconstruction, I was using a method that involved the channel mixer. Now I've made a DCTL to kind of streamline that. So in this clip, you can see what the highlight reconstruction does. So without it, you can see we have these like yellow rings that are going here where the highlights have clipped unequally in the different channels. And through the highlight reconstruction, I've gone ahead and fixed that for this shot. Generally, the highlight reconstruction requires that the highlights that are clipped are like one specific color. So you can imagine if I had like a red LED tube and like a blue tube and they're both somewhat clipped, it'd be kind of hard to fix both at once. But fortunately for most shots, the highlights are like usually something that's white. So, and certainly that's the sort of thing that I generally clipped during this short. So all of these shots that look like this, we use the highlight reconstruction. I'll show you how I set that up actually. So let me turn that off and I'll put it on the on this guy here, and I'll show you how we set that up. We can see when I darken it, like how clipped these highlights are, right? Here's the idea. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out which channels are clipped. So I'm going to go ahead and display the red channel, and we'll zoom in here. And the red channel, you know, I can kind of see that it's clipping around here. The look is adding some grain right now. So normally you would do this with the look turned off. Here's the green channel, and then here is the blue channel. So obviously the blue channel has by far the most data in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this blue channel that has all this detail right here, and we're going to use this data and insert it just into the red channel and into the green channel. So I'm going to set blue to red, indicating that I'm going to take my blue channel and put it into the red channel. I'm going to set this guy blue to green, so I'm going to take the blue channel and put it into the green channel as well. Now it's just a question of how much. So we're going to go ahead and set our clipping points. So I'm going to set display red mask, and we're going to drag this up until we just capture the clipped parts of the red channel. So that's going to be, earlier I had it set to about 4.5, so we'll just go ahead and repeat that. And we'll also do the same with the green channel. So here we're going to find that these all are at about the same point. So we'll just say they're all 4.5. Whoops. So feathering here indicates how far below the clipping point for that channel we're going to feather down to. So usually the -0.3 does an okay job. So the next thing we're going to do is click display red channel, and this is going to show us our red channel. Right now what's going on with the red channel is it's like the original red input value, but then when the red channel exceeds 4.5 stops above mid-gray, or really like, you know, 4.2 stops to 4.5 stops above mid-gray, we're going to replace that with the blue channel. Now the blue channel, being unclipped, is obviously darker than the other channels. So we'll go ahead and gain this addition to the red channel until it looks really smooth. So we're just going to dial this up until it feels like it blends in nicely. And then we're going to go ahead and do that again with the green channel. So this guy, we're going to dial this dude up until it looks smooth to the eye as well. Somewhere around there. And I'm just going to sneakily check my work. We can see that the numbers I dialed in are almost identical actually to what they were before. So I'm going to uncheck darken, and I'm going to do display result. And you can see we've got a very nice smooth gradation now compared to what it was before. So there you have it. That's kind of a demo on how to use this tool. Next up, we have deflicker. So despite the fact that I was shooting at 24 frames per second in South Africa, which is a PAL country, where generally you would be shooting at 25 because all their circuits run at 50 hertz, I generally didn't have too much of a flickering problem in any of the locations we shot. The one exception being this location. So this area was illuminated by a light that was in the backyard that we did not place there. And this light did have some serious flickering problems. So if we turn off the deflicker, we might be able to see it. You know, we can see it. You should be able to see it pulsing, right? So I went ahead and added a deflicker, and generally I would also combine this with some kind of mask. So I was drawing a power window here, and for some of the other shots, I also magic masked Dylan out because he was like halfway covering it. So here I just set it to fluoro light. It didn't always work. There's a shot in the short a bit later in which the flickering is still there. But for the most part, I was able to eliminate it, particularly when it was one of the more static shots. Next up, we have tilt shift. One challenge with this short film is that we have like a lot of these shots with the bingo boards, but because there are so many different like squares on the board, like there are 25 squares there, we have to make sure that the eye is guided to the specific square that we want them to read. So this was particularly important at the climax of the movie, where Justina grabs the board and we want to focus in on this one square that says "Don't show up to fancy date." So I use a combination of the, do we not actually use the tilt shift on this one? That's crazy. So we use tilt shift. Now I mistakenly put it all the way down here, which is kind of a disaster. So don't do that. But yeah, so anyway, that sort of like texture adjustment, we have a spot in the node tree that I failed to use, but disregarding that, let's move on. We have a pre-flare. So pre-flare is going to be a node in which we apply an offset to the image. So this is going to be useful when we have some kind of like flare that's in the frame that we want to remove. And then post-flare is going to be better for like a creative flare adjustment, because the pre-flare is going to be the same regardless of what your balance and exposure adjustments are. Whereas a post-flare is something where like it's going to set like a new black point that will just be consistent after an exposure adjustment. So here's a shot with the pre-flare where basically without it, The black point was a little too milky, so I brought the black point down so that it would be a better match for the other shots around it. So pre-flare is just going to be offset. Balance and exposure are both just going to be gain, being sure to set lume mix equal to 0. Of course, in the project settings, you can set it so that the luminance mixer always defaults to 0 in any new node. Next up, we have post-flare. Post-flare is better for the creative black point decisions. For example, if you wanted to raise the black point of an entire scene and didn't want it to be on the group level because maybe a couple shots don't need it, then I would put that in the post-flare instead. And post-flare is just going to be offset again. Next up, we have contrast. This was intended to be a gamma/gain adjustment. I ultimately didn't use it because I feel that contrast is generally best left to the look level. And hopefully my consistency of lighting on set will allow me to not have to match contrast from shot to shot. Next up, I have 4 dodge and burn nodes, the idea being that these are places where I can put a power window and then gain it up or down. So being that I used gain in all of these, they will be commutative. And they also serve as like maybe spare nodes in which I could drop in other adjustments. Next up, we have our secondaries. So some of these secondaries that I used were like hue versus hue curves. Without this, the scene was like, it's like a little bit garish, with some of the yellows kind of being a more of a pea color than something that's appealing. So I went ahead and used the hue versus hue curve to bring it closer to something that's a little more orange and warm. So the next few nodes are secondaries that are based off of qualifiers. So I grab my qualifiers over here from a state towards the beginning of the entire pipeline. That way, my qualifiers aren't going to be affected when I do a balance or an exposure adjustment. The mask will stay kind of fixed. People seem to think that this is a desirable quality to have. In retrospect, I maybe should have attached this like, maybe more like towards right after the tilt shift, because if I use the tilt shift, then obviously my masks won't really line up with the new like blurred image as much anymore. So, maybe for future thought, right? Anyway, the idea here is that I have a DCTL that creates a luminance qualifier. So you can see here, here's like a shadow qualifier and here's a highlight qualifier. And after qualifying the highlights, for example, in this shot, I would qualify the highlights and I would blur them a bunch. So then that kind of grabs this entire region of the frame. And then I can just gain that down. And that gives us a little bit more detail out of this window, which makes it a little bit less overpowering. I had a similar thing for shadows, and if I needed another qualifier, I had that available too. As well as like a miscellaneous out, just in case there's anything that I needed to do at the very end of the pipeline. This would also turn into like some kind of compound node. Next up, let's examine the look stage of the pipeline. So keep in mind, at this point in the pipeline, we are still in linear in the camera primaries that we received from the Zcam. So the first thing we're going to do is we have a vignette that's going to be applied to all the shots in the pipeline. We then go to log, but we're not really like going to these primaries. The whole point of this log encoding is just so that we can do a spatial resize operation. So I'm doing a lens distortion here, and I'm doing like a scale up here. So the combination of the two results in the middle of the frame being enlarged slightly. These Laowa nanomorph zoom lenses that I showed you earlier, they have some pincushion distortion, and I generally don't like that. So we're going to preemptively fight it with some barrel distortion being added to the middle of the frame. Next, we undo this adjustment to a DaVinci intermediate so that we can continue in our linear state. I do an edge extension. This is not something that's necessarily visible, but you can see that when I turn it on, it extends the edges of the frame that are going to be visible all the way to the very ends. The idea here is that later when I do other adjustments, they're not going to be like blurring the black bars and having those erode into the frame, or sharpening black bars or anything like that. So here we have a very subtle scatter adjustment. So, I don't have the scatter plugin, but I do have a blur, and I also have low key output gain. So here we have 1% key output gain, and we just have like a blur to like, 1.23. So, in this shot, it's doing just a little bit. It's really easy to go too far with these kinds of like diffusion filter sort of looks. So I recommend not doing that. Next up, we're just going to change the primaries. So we're changing from the camera native primaries to DaVinci wide gamut, because some of my downstream tools are expecting DaVinci wide gamut primaries. So as you remember, when we were shooting the video, most of the scenes at night were lit with a blue light that represented the moonlight and also some warm lights. So sometimes this blue light was honestly just like too much, right? And then like if I take a scene that is lit warmly and I like cool it off so that the skin isn't looking too crazy, then that can be problematic too, because then I've taken this blue light and we've cooled it off even more. So now it's even like more blue, right? So what I've done here is I've added a hue qualifier for like this kind of cyan bluish color, and I've applied my bleach bypass DCTL, which expects a linear state image. It tends to desaturate colors a little bit. So here you can see before the blue's like a little strong here. Then after, we dial it down a little bit. Next up, we've got a split tone adjustment. So this is in Rapid Grade. This is a plugin that I've been working on for a lot of this year with Kazi. And frankly, that's why it took me so long to work on this short film. It basically ate up like 6 or 7 months of my time. So within here, right now, I'm going to be using the split tone tool just to kind of push some more blue in, ironically. And here I've qualified it to exclude the shadows so that we don't contaminate them too much. Next up, we have a density adjustment. So in this one, you can see that I've made like generally the blues and the yellows and whatnot just a little bit denser, a little bit darker, so that they're a touch more appealing. And then finally, we have the curves. So here we're using the 5207 plus 2383 curves, and I've made some slight modifications to them, but originally the curves were based on the film data sheet. So here you can get an idea for what kind of curves adjustment we're doing. And to be clear, you could apply this curves adjustment in like Resolve. Like you could draw these out yourself, but you can see that generally we keep it, there's the slightest amount of blue in the shadows over here, and then there's a more dramatic amount of warmth in the highlights and kind of an early roll off to the highlights as well. So I found personally that I don't think that your 1D curves should apply much blue in the shadows at all. In fact, if you just applied 0, you'd probably be better off than a lot of approaches. And that's really the main thing that I'm applying in this instance. In principle, you could like kind of combine all of these into like one instance of Rapid Grade. You don't have to like break them out like I just did, but there's nothing wrong with doing it the way that I did either. This makes it a little easier for me to like copy and paste just one specific thing, although we do have the capability to like just copy and paste like specific adjustments within Rapid Grade. In some scenes here, you can see that I've also added a saturation adjustment real quick. So I've taken the saturation and added 5% at the same time as the curves adjustment. That was one of the main things that differed on a scene by scene basis. Sometimes the lighting felt like it needed more saturation and sometimes it didn't. Next up, we've got bleach bypass again. So this is just going to protect us from like really crazy looking colors. Up next, we've got grain. So here's the fixed signal to noise ratio grain that you can get this DCTL for free, as well as the bleach bypass one just right on my GitHub. This grain, I think, is putting in a very tasteful amount of work. So you can see like without it and then with it turned on. And I think it just like feels about right to me, honestly. And I think people are sleeping on this DCTL because I think it looks really good. And everyone goes to like my film grain DCTLs. Stop using that one, guys. Just use this one. It doesn't affect your contrast or anything. Finally, we're running a 2499, which I found to be the smoothest of the DRTs that I've tried so far. Generally with 2499, I go in and I take red purity and I dial that down to 0. And I go ahead and output Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. The last thing in the node tree here is going to be output blanking. So I output blank to a 2.25 ratio because I shot it on this 3:2 mode in Super 35. And then we had 1.5x anamorphic lenses. So this matches the original aspect ratio that I shot under, and therefore is closer to the intended framing. At the timeline level, we don't really have too much going on. We just have a clamp, so we make sure that we don't exceed Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 in any way, although the DRT should have guaranteed that, and we'll have that also guaranteed in the deliver page. And we have another clamp. I guess we have 2 clamps sitting here. In between, we've got like a couple useful nodes. So one of them here is the resize checker. So what does this do? Well, the resize checker is just there to save me in case I botch a resize at one point or another. So let's suppose I turn this on just to show you how it works. And suppose on this clip, let's make sure I select the right clip. Otherwise, I'm going to set myself up for some pain. Suppose I had it scaled down wrong, right? Then you can see that very abruptly, the resize checker will identify this as like, oh, this is a problem. You've got like black bars going around it. See, so if I go over to here and turn this off, you can see I've got a black bar here and it knows, right? And it's also like sensitive to other setups. So like suppose I'm here, but like I did like a little bit of a rotation. It can also detect that here too, see? So it can identify problems like that. And that saved me on a couple shots in this short too. The next thing in my timeline node tree is the white matte. So this just adds a little white frame around it so I can see how my grade would look with a different kind of surround. In general, it is my opinion that like if your grade falls apart, like the second that you turn on like a white mask around it, then it's probably a little too dark, to be honest. So overall, I'm looking at my screen on the left and I don't mind it with the white matte. So let's talk about how I'm going to upload this thing to YouTube. So everyone's familiar with the SDR workflow for YouTube, where if I take this video as is, which is prepped for displays that are Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, YouTube will take these SDR files and generally apply a horrific amount of compression to them. This means that these night scenes are probably going to be macro blocked and look kind of terrible, and will have none of the grain texture that I've specified, no matter what resolution you view the file at. However, the real trick for this that everyone on YouTube seems to have slept on is that if you upload in HDR, and in my case I'm going to be uploading in PQ, then everyone who's getting an HDR stream from YouTube will get a substantially better image quality because the compression artifacts will be like massively reduced. I don't know why YouTube chooses to have less compression artifacts when you use an HDR upload, but for whatever reason, that just is the case, right? Now, that's going to be true for your viewers who use HDR compatible devices. For the viewers who use SDR compatible devices and have no HDR streaming ability, unfortunately, YouTube is still going to compress it down to the usual terrible amount, and it's going to look like not great for them. Additionally, YouTube is going to apply an HDR to SDR conversion for those users. Now, there is a way to control that HDR to SDR conversion so that it matches the intended image that you wanted. So my philosophy when delivering this sort of thing is I've mastered it in SDR, and I'm going to show the people who have HDR devices exactly the same image that I've mastered here. And then further, we're going to have YouTube convert it to SDR, and we're going to show those users also the same image that I mastered here. So as a result, the people with HDR compatible screens are just going to get less compression artifacts, and they'll get the same exact image otherwise. And overall, they'll get a much better experience. So that's what we're going to do here. My SDR to HDR conversion strategy is going to be to turn on this node, which just goes from Gamma 2.4 to Rec 2020 PQ. If we only consider the top half here, this is going to colorimetrically reproduce my Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 monitor output to be identically encoded in the Rec 2020 PQ standard. However, I'm also going to check this box here, which will add a 2.03 times gain. So instead of like the top of my image being 100 nits, it will be 203 nits. So it's like the equivalent of setting your screen like one stop brighter. I do this because PQ is an absolute metric, which specifies the exact quantity of nits. Oftentimes they actually let the end user lower the brightness, but not increase the brightness beyond what you've set it to, which honestly is kind of stupid. But that's the world we live in, and 2.03 x gain is basically the recommendation. Next up, we will go to the deliver page. So I'll show you what my export looked like. I went ahead and exported it in ProRes. I'll admit, you don't really have to do this. You could have just gone with H.265 10-bit. That would be totally acceptable. And I also probably could have just gone with 422 instead of HQ, but I did want to keep one of these deliverables like offline for myself. I'm going to keep it at my 4K timeline resolution, and I do recommend uploading in 4K even if you're shooting and editing in 1080p, just because YouTube will allow a higher bit rate for people who are streaming in 4K. So you might as well give that to them. Frankly, with the YouTube stream, you get almost all of your gains from reducing the compression artifacts as much as possible, rather than the actual resolution of your video. So I see no downside to setting your deliverable resolution to 4K or higher when uploading to YouTube. Next up, this is important. I'm going to set the color space tag and the gamma tag to Rec 2020 ST2084. This is important so that YouTube will see the encoding that I've specified here. I'll check bypass re-encode when possible so that if I've already render cached the entire pipeline, then it will stick to those and I don't even need to re-encode them. It can just use them as is. And likewise, I will check use render cached images so that it will actually make use of my render cache. All right, next up, under subtitle settings, I'm going to export the subtitles that I've generated as an SRT. That way I can separately upload them to YouTube and have subtitles on my video on day one. I actually generated my subtitles in a separate timeline using DaVinci Resolve's audio transcription service. Basically, I exported this project out, and then I brought it back into Resolve in a fresh timeline and right-clicked and selected transcribe audio. And from there, that gives you a subtitle track, and I just had to edit those subtitles. That was a massive improvement over writing the subtitles myself by hand. Under audio, I'm just going to set the audio to linear PCM, which is lossless. You could also do AAC. Sometimes on Resolve, I've had problems with AAC where it didn't sound right. I'm not sure what's up with that or if that got fixed over time. And then finally, yeah, that's pretty much it. So I went ahead and hit export on that. And then I applied an HDR to SDR LUT, which I would have to embed into the file. Let's walk through how to make one of those. All right, so here's a Fusion comp in which I show how to make the LUT. So here we've got the LUT cube creator, which creates a hulled image. And just for reference, here's the same CST settings that we were using before. I do want to demonstrate exactly what this is doing. So here's how that looks, right? And if I instead go from Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 to Rec 2020 linear, right? And then apply 2.03x gain, and then do the PQ encoding with none of this stuff checked, and we can see that it fully matches the CST that we previously did. So that tells us exactly what the HDR 203 diffuse white checkbox is doing. Next up over here, we're going to be doing the inverse of this, right? So here I'm going Rec 2020, Rec 2100, ST2084 to linear. I'm going to do a 1 over 2.03 times gain. So we're going to divide by 2.03, and then we're going to do a Gamma 2.4 encoding, right? Finally, this is very important. I also do a clamp 0 to 1. So we can see this guy is going to actually match the CST that is doing Rec 2020, ST2084 to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 with this box checked. So we can see that this guy and here have a good match, and we can see that on the waveform that nothing's moving. We will also do a clamp, so both of these are going to be clamped, right? And then finally, we must verify that connecting, say, this CST to this one, like over here, that this results in the same as identity. So truly, we are doing the inverse of that last node that was in our timeline node tree, right? So we're going to send this to LUT Cube Analyzer and click Write File to write a LUT somewhere. I'm calling it sdr.cube. And it's also important that we make this a 33-point LUT because it seems that YouTube doesn't really like the 65-point LUTs. So in short, we're uploading this file to YouTube that was created by doing this standard SDR to HDR conversion. And then we're going to provide YouTube with the HDR to SDR conversion that perfectly inverts that SDR to HDR conversion. So the next step is going to be to embed this cube LUT into the file that we exported. In order to attach our cube file to the deliverable that we made, we're going to have to go over to the YouTube HDR metadata repo and go ahead and just download the code with a download zip here. I'm going to unzip it. Ultimately, you're going to navigate to wherever it is that MKV merge is. So if you're on macOS, you would be going to macOS here, and you would probably run this guy instead. So in my case, I'm on Windows, so I'm going to use mkvmerge.exe, and I'm going to go ahead and open a PowerShell window in this folder. We can use pwd in order to see what path we're currently at and make sure that we're in the right spot. And from there, I'm going to paste in my command. So here we're going to be calling mkvmerge.exe, and here's the file that we're going to output to. So it's going to be nobodyplaysblackout.mkv. We've got a bunch of metadata stuff. Frankly, I'm not sure you actually need to include all of these. But the important one is this last one here, which is attachment mime type xcube, and then we're going to attach our sdr.cube file that we generated. It's very important that sdr.cube fits certain requirements, so you should clamp the cube to be 0 to 1 in its range, and it should be a 32 or 33 point cube. Those are the most important parts. If you have like super lifted blacks or things like that, then YouTube's also going to flag it, and they're not going to tell you, and they're just going to ignore it. The last parameter is going to be the specific file name that we're going to be using. In my case, it's this export 10. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it in here, and we are going to wait for it to run. And in my case, because it's ProRes 422HQ, it's an enormous file, and it's going to take forever. So we'll just fast forward through that. It looks like the conversion is finished, and now I can go ahead and upload nobodyplaysblackout.mkv up to YouTube, and everything should behave as I had expected. Sometimes it is important to double check that the SDR conversion behaved as expected, so that's something that I will also be doing in order to quality control my short film. So for those of you who made it this far into the BTS video and everyone who enjoyed the short film, thank you so much for watching and for sticking around, and I'm excited to see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.